Davis steps under center. Gibson and McClendon behind him. Davis with motion by Richard. Will give the ball to McClendon. He leaps. Oh, he doesn't get in. He fumbled the football. Carolina holds. The game is over. And Carolina has won the game.
Finley to throw. Over the middle, intercepted. Wolford again. Wolford the other way. At the 30, the 40. Wolford to midfield. Miles Wolford with the pick. The heels on the doorstep of an enormous victory.
Left side of the line. Hood standing to Williams' right. Williams gonna throw. One-on-one. Davis has it. Touchdown. Carolina wins. Carolina is the Coastal Division champion. Bernard fields it at the 26. Heading to the far side. Gio at the 35. Gio is at the 50. No, he's not. Yes, he is. Gio is going to take it for a touchdown. Are you kidding me? Connor Barth for the possible win. Snap, spot, kick away, high enough, long enough. It's good! It's good! Carolina has won the game on a 42-yard field goal by freshman Connor Barth. Good gosh, dirty!
This is the Heel Tough Blog Podcast.
Hey guys, and welcome to another edition of the Heel Tough Blog Podcast. It's your host, Anthony Pagnotta, with you guys as always. And today, Josh Marlowe back with me. It is time for another one of our favorite editions of the podcast to do every year. Today on the podcast, we give you our breakout candidates for the 2021 season. This has gone well in the past. We both predicted De'Ami Brown would be a breakout candidate back in 2019. It also has not gone all that well. We are both still waiting for, or I am. I don't remember if you put him on there. I am still waiting for Chris Collins to break out for my 2019 prediction. Chris Collins, also the season that I predicted him to break out, did not play a single game. So yeah, we're gonna see. Our list this year. I think we both thought when we were going through and doing this, it was a little more obvious this year than probably in past years, but still, I think it'll be interesting to throw some of the names out there. I think the thing with this is trying to sort through all of the different guys and find your group that you actually think is going to break out. I think that's the bigger thing. So we'll go through, talk a little bit about that. We'll also tell you a couple of things at the end of the show regarding a big upcoming commitment for the Tar Heels on the 2022 trail that you'll want to be keeping an eye on, and we'll also update some of the guys in the NFL after preseason week number 1 as a couple of guys fighting for roster spots, a couple of guys with pretty nice performances to start out. So we'll tell you all about that. But first, we're going to take a look at some of the top storylines right now around Tar Heel football. Of course, a week and a half into fall practice. They also today learned their ranking in the AP poll, and that's what we're going to start with. Tar Heels ranked 10th in the Associated Press poll. Really, the difference is that Cincinnati is ahead of them. That was the only difference. Yeah. Cincinnati is 8. Carolina drops down to 10 as a result of that. Honestly, can't really be all that angry about that. I still think that they're a better football team than Cincinnati. I think if you put those two teams on a field, I'm going to trust Sam Howell and this group to go out and beat that team head to head on a neutral field if both teams are kind of in a rhythm middle of the season. But you know what? I think at this point, being inside of the top 10 is an accomplishment for this team. It's the first time they've been preseason ranked inside the top 10 since the 1997 season. So regardless, a great starting position for Carolina. And I think the biggest thing is if Carolina is looking to make the college football playoff for some reason, you need to typically be inside of this range to have any sort of chance to start the season. So they're in that range as well. So this is just about everything that you could have hoped for the Tar Heels. Now it's about going out there and proving it.
Yeah. Like you said, the only thing that was really different was Cincinnati's ranked ahead of you, which Cincinnati went undefeated in the regular season. They took Georgia to, I believe, overtime or a full 60 minutes in the Peach Bowl last year, returned their quarterback. Pathway for them to go undefeated and maybe spoil the college football playoff themselves. So there was not a big drastic change from the coaches poll, Carolina's 9, to the AP poll where they're 10.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know if I agree with you on Cincinnati. I think we've seen that the College Football Playoff Committee not going to give a chance really to the group of 5, but I think that's a good sign that they are 8th.
Well, there's a good chance if there. You have a 2-loss Pac-12 or a Big 12 champion and a 2-loss maybe Big 10 or ACC champion, then there's a pathway for them to sneak in unless the Pac-12 has an undefeated champion, which I don't think that's going to happen either. A lot's got to go right for them.
Right.
But if they were in the college football playoff, I wouldn't be overly surprised.
Well, here's the thing. First of all, it doesn't matter. If you go in and you win every game in the regular season and you go in and you beat Clemson in the ACC title game, then you don't have to worry about it.
Yeah.
Is that going to happen? Who knows? Probably not. Most people would expect that's not going to happen, but there's other pathways for Carolina to get to the playoff. That's stuff that we'll be talking about throughout the season as this team goes throughout their schedule. If they're in that position, we'll probably maybe touch on it a little bit right before the season when we go through and look at the schedule one last time and give our official predictions. But other than that, I think that this is just, honestly, the only reason that this is really that important is this is the number that's going to be next to Carolina's name on that first night on September 3rd when they play Virginia Tech. That's the only significance that this number really has to start the season. So a couple other storylines. Mac Brown, of course, took to the podium yesterday on the day of recording, which is a Monday. He took to the podium yesterday on Sunday to talk about his team scrimmage on Saturday. Also, some other news that was released. He did say in the press conference, Bo Corrales is still limited in practice. That was one of the that was the only real injury update that you got from that. UNC later released afterwards that outside linebacker Ethan West out for the second consecutive year due to injury. Of course, he played in a couple games early last year, got injured, missed the rest of the season. This year, he will miss the entire season, so you hate that for Ethan West. That's 2 years in a row with back-to-back bad injury luck. Former 4-star recruit, guy that had a lot of talent, but just can't seem to get on the field. Those are the injury updates, really, from camp. One really positive note that we heard from Mac Brown, he talked about this at length in his press conference, was that Caleb Hood has emerged as the number 2 running back behind Ty Chandler. The only real area that they're still somewhat concerned about him in is pass protection, but that's something that Mac Brown says that they are still working on with him. But they've really been impressed with him in just about every other aspect. He's done a great job of holding on to the football, which was something that I think they were wondering about. He looks really good out of the backfield catching the football, Mac Brown says, and he also talked about how he has the ability to put the foot in the ground and be patient in the backfield when running inside the tackles, has the speed to get to the outside, so a pretty complete running back as well. So it looks like, as of right now, there may be another guy that ends up emerging before the end of camp. There's still another scrimmage coming up. Carolina's still got plenty more practices before they get to the start of the season. But it looks like right now it is going to be Ty Chandler and then Caleb Hood when they go to Virginia Tech in Blacksburg. So we'll see. We'll see what Carolina's backfield rotation looks like, but it is a positive that you are at least seeing some other guys start to emerge in that backfield. That was one of the big question marks coming into camp. One of the other big question marks, apparently not all that positive in terms of solving the question mark, is Jacoby Criswell, Drake May, a backup quarterback. Mac Brown said there has not been really any separation there. Every time it looks like one guy is about to separate himself, the other guy usually comes back and performs well enough to where he puts himself right back in the race. That's the positive side of it, is that it seems like mainly it's the fact that guys are doing good things that are allowing them to stay in the race, not that guys are doing bad things that are forcing them to fall back to the other quarterback that has gone behind. But Mac Brown did say that he is going to talk to Phil Longo. The goal is for them to try to find some more creative ways to create separation back there, because Mac Brown said it. You've got to have another guy back there in case Sam Howell has to miss a game game due to injury, due to COVID concerns, which is something that's starting to pop back up here. So they've got to be ready for that situation. And right now, these two are battling it out. And of course, that is going to set the precedent as well for next season. They're hoping that quarterback battle can be solved going into the first game of the year, but that might be one that takes a little bit longer. That game against Georgia State, if Carolina is in a good enough position, might be a game where they could throw some of those guys into game action and figure it out if it's still neck and neck at the time. Guy that is surprising is true freshman Bryson Nesbitt. Mac Brown says he is extremely excited with what he's seeing from the true freshman summer enrollee at tight end. He said that he's got really good hands. He can run after the catch. One thing that they were concerned about him coming out of high school because he played a lot in the slot as a tight end, did a little more this year being attached to the line of scrimmage. They were a little bit concerned about his blocking ability, but that's something that he sort of corrected. They said it looks really good, and he's a guy that Mac Brown said is pushing for some reps. So that's going to be interesting to keep an eye on there. Garrett Walston is their number one tight end. We've heard a lot about Kamari Morales, but this is an extremely athletic tight end that can do a lot of things for you in the passing game. He's got the ability to go up and get the football, and that's something that Carolina really wants in the red zone. So we'll see if Bryson Nesbitt is able to sort of gain some early reps here as we head closer and closer to the fall. Mac Brown did say on the defensive side of things, not a ton of updates on that side, really just focused on the fact that defensive snaps are now being divided up between who the best players are and who can give you something if they need to. Basically, they're just trying to sort out the depth chart there. You're trying to separate those guys that you look at as starters and the guys that you look at as rotational players. And Mac said the other big thing, mainly when it comes to that defensive line, is trying to figure out how many snaps guys can play down there while still being as effective as they can possibly be before they have to take them out and rotate in guys that will allow them to get a little bit of rest and not have a drop-off in efficiency on the field. He is also, one of the more interesting things that he said, looking at that linebacking position and seeing if there is some room for rotation there. He said that there has not been a lot of rotation there the first 2 years on campus, which, yeah, he's not lying about that. So now he's taking a look there and seeing, is this a group now, even though they're younger, with Cedric Gray, Power Eccles, Ra Dilworth, is there enough talent there to possibly get some rotation going there? Will that allow them to be more efficient? Those are the types of things that they're looking at on the defensive side right now. And then special teams was a big focus on Saturday in the scrimmage. Mac Brown, this has been one of the areas where he has said this Carolina team has to get better this year. They have really been focusing on it. He is liking what he's seeing. He says they've got a lot of really good pieces, starting with the guys that return in the kicking game. Of course, you got Jonathan Kim, who is your kickoff specialist back, and then you've got your two main kickers who return in Grayson Atkins, who will handle the place kicking, and of course the punting, going the way of Ben Kiernan, who's been their punter for 2 years and has been pretty consistent. One of those guys that'll probably be in the hunt for all ACC honors. But he said that he does like the guys that they have back there as return options, really likes Josh Downs, says that one of the main things that he's really been focused on here over the last couple of months is trying to get this team in a better spot when it comes to punt blocking and punt returning. And he said that punt blocking was one of the things that he did very well at Texas. His teams did very well back then. He wants to get back to that at Carolina, and he thinks that that will help with some of the punt returning because he feels like, the last couple years they've had a really talented guy back there in Daz Newsome, but they haven't done a good enough job in front of him to create those opportunities. He feels like Josh Downs is a similar player, a guy that could take it to the house just about any time that he touches it, but he needs that blocking in front of him, so they've made that a really big focus of camp. So those are some of the top storylines that are coming out of camp right now as they are a week and a half in. As I mentioned, next Saturday, another scrimmage. So they are getting into the thick of fall camp here. This is where the depth chart will start to be narrowed down. You would expect here over the next couple of weeks, we're going to find out what the depth chart looks like before they get ready to head up to Blacksburg as well. So some crucial times here in fall camp, and some of these question marks that still haven't been answered, it feels like we're going to start to find out some of those answers here pretty fast and furious over the next couple of weeks. So we move on to the breakout candidates. As we mentioned, we do this every year. Some of them have gone very well. Other predictions have gone horribly wrong. This year, I think, there's a lot of really good candidates that are on the list for this year. A lot of young guys that are going to be playing significant roles this year that could break out. And we're going to give you our top 5. We may also talk about a couple of other guys that may have possibly been on our list as well, but just didn't make it because there are so many guys this year. But I'll let you start off. I started off last week because you had the hottest take. This week, I don't think they're overly these won't be as bold as some of the predictions from last week for who we think breaks out. But who do you got as your number one breakout candidate?
My number one breakout player, I start with Josh Downs. Not really bold, not really that all that surprising. He's taken over for Daz Newsome in the slot. We saw him in the Orange Bowl last year, what he can do on the field with Sam Howell as his quarterback. He's already emerged at Sam Howell's go-to target, what we saw in spring practice, and that's continuing over here in fall camp. I think this guy's got 1,000 yards and 10 touchdown potential in this offense. And I think if Carolina's going to be the team they want to be, I think he's got to be that kind of player for this offense and for this football team. So he's my number one breakout player for this upcoming season.
Yeah, I got him on my list as well. I'd put him number one. I mean, you look at what he did last year in the Orange Bowl game in his most significant time on the field. Looked the part of a guy that's going to be able to take over and play a significant role. Carolina's going to need him in the slot with Daz Newsome gone, and he pretty much can do it all. He's a guy, I mean, I just talked about it there a minute ago, how Mac Brown says every time he touches the ball, he feels like he can take it to the house. That's not only as a returner, that's as a receiver as well. So he can do a lot of things after the catch. He does a lot of really good things before the catch, and I mean, he's got pretty reliable hands as we've seen as well. So it feels like this guy is one that's going to be one of the more complete receivers for Carolina in a while if he can live up to expectations. You would think that he's probably going to be somewhere around the numbers that Ryan Switzer was able to put up in his time on campus. And I feel like this is one of those guys that may not quite be a household name yet. I feel like there are a lot of the really in-depth college football writers nationally probably know about him. But this is a guy that everybody will know. I would say by mid-season. I mean, maybe the Virginia Tech game, but I think definitely by mid-season he will be a guy that will be firmly on everybody's radar.
Yep. Am I going number 2? Am I going my whole list?
Well, no.
You didn't.
Number 1 was Josh Downs for mine too.
Oh. Okay. Number 2 for me is a guy that you put on your bold prediction list to lead the team in sacks with over 10. Put Des Evans as number 2. I think you put on the weight. We never questioned the talent last year. We could just say he was a little bit small. He's added over 30 pounds of muscle over the offseason. And I think he has the ability to be an electric player, record a lot of sacks, something that this defense needs. If this defense is going to take the next step, they got to be able to get pressure without blitzing their linebackers as much as they've had the last 2 years. I think he's poised to do that. He's my number 2 breakout player for this upcoming season.
So I have a guy that you may or may not have on your list, but I mean, it's tough because, again, I feel like some people thought he got off to a good start this year. I think this is going to be a huge year for him, though, and that's Myles Murphy. We have heard a ton about him so far throughout camp. We heard about him a lot in the spring, too. But really, as they've started to go through those summer months and head into the fall, we've heard more and more about him up front, and it seems like he's going to play a big role either way. The best thing about him is that we've heard, from Mac Brown and from a couple of the other guys on the team as well, he can move back and forth between end and tackle. That's why he's going to be, so versatile for this team, and they can use him in so many different ways. One of the biggest things for this team a year ago, they had some talent up front for sure. Ray Vohasek is a really talented dude in the middle of that defense. He's a guy that, I mean, you said you have him as a first team All ACC guy. Mm-hmm. Phil Steele has him, one of college football's preseason magazine's best when it comes to predicting everything. Has him as a third team All American. You've got Tamari Fox, who put up really good stats a year ago, but as we talked about late last year and throughout this summer, that was a group that got worn down constantly late in games, and it was very, very evident in the games against Notre Dame and Texas A&M. Carolina needs to have another guy in there, and they've got plenty more behind him, but they need to have another guy in there that can be a force and can handle starter-like reps, and that's, I think, what Myles Murphy can be for this team. I mean, the statistics don't jump off the page for you, but he's a really sound defensive lineman. I was going to say defensive end, but he can play both positions, and really just does a good job of covering his gaps. He's a very smart player, and he's another guy. He's added a little bit of weight, and it feels like he's probably going to be a little bit more confident in himself this year, having had a full spring and a full summer with the team in a more normal capacity. It's still not quite, 100% normal in terms of what they've done in the past, but he's definitely in a good position, I think, this year to take a huge step forward. And I think, honestly, Carolina's kind of going to need him or somebody else behind him, if he's not the guy, to step up and have a big year for them on a defensive line where they frankly need to win more of those one-on-one battles, something that Mac Brown's talked about a lot.
Number 3 for me is a guy we've talked at length really since we've got into the summer and the fall months. That's Giovanni Biggers. I think it's pretty clear that he's taken the next step. We've seen that in the spring game especially. And, it's really hard to say, is he going to have 80 tackles or is he going to have 5 interceptions? I don't know. I don't know what his numbers are going to look like.
Right.
But I do think he's going to be a breakout player for this team in that secondary because he doesn't kill you. He makes the little plays that you need to make, and I think that's something that this defense really just needs. They need guys that are going to be sound football players. You're talking about Myles Murphy. He's a sound defensive lineman. Giovanni Biggers is a sound defensive back that Carolina is going to be better with him on the field as opposed to him sitting on the sidelines.
Yeah, look, I don't think, and I have Biggers on my list. I'll have him a little bit lower. I'm going to be honest with you. I don't think any safety on this team gets to 80 tackles. I think there is going to be so much rotation back there. We talked about this last week, how this is probably going to be a week-by-week approach. One of the things that Mac Brown talked about in his press conference on Sunday that was a little bit concerning to me is that they are still letting up some deep passes down the field. That's an area where they've got to get better. And he said, look, we're challenging the corners to be better on the outside. I get that. I think part of this is still that the safeties may not be where they want them exactly.
But also, you're going up against the top 2 quarterback in college football. He's going to make you look silly.
Right. So, I mean, we'll see. But I think there is going to be a lot of rotation back there. I said it last week. I think it's going to be one of those things where, look, if you make one mistake, they're not going to pull you off the field. But if you're making enough mistakes where they feel like you are hurting the team, they will take you off and put somebody else back there. They have enough talent. They have guys that they feel confident in back there, enough to where they can rotate you out, put you on the sideline, and say, look, you got to get this fixed. Right now you're out of the game because we've got somebody in there that we think is just going to help us not get killed back there. And I think that's the big thing that you'll have to see. And he'll be one of the main guys in that rotation. He is not at number 3 on my list. Number 3, I have Des Evans, who you talked about there. I mean, look, I have him reaching the double-digit sack mark, so I had to have him on this list for sure. And I think he's going to take a big step forward this year. As I said, coming out of high school, the mindset, the mentality, the skill set really wasn't the question. It was just the fact that he was 235 pounds. In high school, I mean, that worked. He was faster than just about everybody else. He was still more powerful than everybody else, even at 235 pounds. When he got to the college level, that wasn't necessarily the case. But even still, at 235 pounds, we saw him at times last year flash. Now he's got the extra weight on, and he's a guy that we've heard a lot about. We haven't heard a ton about the pass rushers, but every time that they get brought up, Des Evans is the first guy that gets gets talked about in that group. And the other thing is that you hear from a lot of the guys, a lot of the players, when they're asked about the guys that can get after the quarterback, Des Evans is the name that gets brought up. Even if he doesn't reach that 10-sack mark, if he can reach similar numbers to what we've seen from Tamon Fox over the last couple of years, I think that would meet the status of a breakout player, and I definitely think he's capable of that this year, especially off the edge. And I mean, look, you know, the ACC's got some talented offensive linemen, but there are some offensive lines that, let's be honest, aren't really all that great. So he should have a chance to tee off against some of these offensive lines, especially early on in the season, and we'll see whether he's able to get the job done or not.
Number 4 for me is a guy we talked a little bit earlier in today's show, Caleb Hood, who's already emerging as a number 2 running back. And you might think, well, he's the number 2 running back. Why is he going to be a breakout player? If you go back when I gave you the bold prediction and I had this team not making the ACC title game, one of my worries that I didn't think they'd be able to run the football early enough in the season where I think if it's going to kill them at Virginia Tech and at home to Miami. But I do think if he's already cut himself as the clear number 2 running back, I'm not going to go back on my prediction, but I think it's easier for you to see Carolina winning at Virginia Tech, winning at Miami, because Ty Chandler is a guy that has a lot of mileage on him already, playing at Tennessee. Mm-hmm. Him being worn down it's going to happen anyway because it's football. But if you have Caleb Hood ready to go at the start of the season, I think it's going to help your team a lot better. But I said this back in the spring. I thought by the end of the season he'd be the number 2 running back on this football. He didn't
even wait that long.
I think he is full. I think he's going to set himself up to be kind of like what we got from Elijah Hood from his freshman and sophomore year. Where that sophomore year he can be a 1,200.
Gee, I wonder how you got to that comparison. May it have something to do with the last name?
No. Not at all.
I mean, look, Elijah Hood, that's a big step. I think he's capable of it. I'm going to tell you, the thing that I like about him is that one of the things that Mac Brown talked about is at 225, he's a very tough kid. He runs with a lot of power, and we saw a little bit of that in the spring game. Yeah. But again, that's against your own guys. So I want to see what it looks like against Virginia Tech, but if that's the area that I am concerned with when it comes to this running game. I think Ty Chandler, we've heard it from Mac Brown, and you can see it on tape when you watch Ty Chandler. He's got the speed to get to the edge. He's got that Michael Carter element that you're going to want. If he needs to run in between the tackles every so often, he can, but you need that guy that if you need to pick up 2 or 3 yards on a third down, you can rely on him. If Caleb Hood can become that guy, that would be huge for this Tar Heel offense. And I mean, if you could find another guy that could help him out there, because there are going to be inconsistencies. He's a true freshman. It's going to happen. I'm looking at a guy like Josh Henderson to emerge there. And that's the thing. Mac Brown's talked about it multiple times. Did it the other day, too. Said that the skill positions are going to be very similar to 2019. So what that means to me is, wide receiver, going to be a lot more rotation, but that's not something that should be shocking at all. The thing that I think you got to focus on is that backfield. They are looking for that third person to emerge. Last year, they had their 2 guys. They didn't need that guy. If you had a third person that all of a sudden emerged and could help you out if a guy went down with injury, then great. They never ran into a situation where they had an injury. Or at least, there were probably moments where a guy got banged up, but you could lean on your other running back for a little bit, and then whoever got banged up was ready to go. This year, there's no guarantee that you're going to have guys that are going to be that durable again. And, there are still some unknowns. You're relying on a true freshman. And look, he's done some great things to this point, clearly, to get the trust of the staff to place him as the number 2 running back as of right now, and a guy that Mac Brown went out of his way to say he feels confident in. But, this is a guy you got to remember that's a converted quarterback. So, here's the third guy. Main thing for that person, can someone emerge as a pass protector? If they can find that guy, that's going to be the guy that's going to come out there and be able to help you as your number 3 guy. So that was your 4th, right?
Yep.
I have Eugene Asante. mean, it's weird because this is one where you could kind of say, well, didn't he kind of break out in the game against A&M? I mean, I guess, but you got to remember that was easily his most significant snaps that he's played in his career. Before that, he was seen sparingly. Now, every time he was seen, we were pretty much like, what is this guy not doing in the game more often? Like, we love the guys we got out here, but this guy's got a ton of talent. We should be rotating him in. I think he's poised for a pretty big season this year. I don't know. I have Jeremiah Gimmel as the guy that's going to be a first-team All-ACC linebacker. To me, it wouldn't shock me if Eugene Asante was in that category either. I think he gives you more flexibility than you had with Chad Surratt. He's a guy that I think can cover sideline to sideline a little bit better than Chad Surratt. And look, I mean, Chad Surratt was a guy that played off of instincts, was a great player, especially for a guy that was a converted quarterback. But that's the thing about him. He was a converted quarterback that was learning the position as he was going along. This is a position that Eugene Asante has been playing for years. He is a guy that fits this position perfectly. Jay Bateman, when he came in as part of Mack Brown's staff, made it a goal, a primary goal in that late that late signing period back in 2019 to go and get this young man. He's now finally going to get his chance. Mack Brown said when he was talking about both him and Josh Downs that experience was great for them, and they feel extremely confident in their ability going into this season, thinks that those guys will keep them from missing a beat at all when it comes to the guys that are leaving. I'm the guy that thinks Eugene Asante could ultimately, especially by the end of the season, be an upgrade from Chad Surratt at the position. So I definitely think this is his year. This is, I mean, there's a lot of guys on here that I think have a really, really good chance of breaking out. This is the one I might be the most confident in, either him or Downs, but I think I would be stunned if Asante is not at least the number 2 tackler on this team. That would blow me away because he's just too good.
Number 5 for me, if you're longtime listeners and readers of the Heel Tough blog, podcast and blog, it's Emory Simmons. I've put him the last 2 years, but I do think there is more reason this year to
Rolling
believe
with him,
he's
baby.
going to be a breakout player. Mack Brown said when he met with the media a couple weeks ago that he's been becoming a deep target for Sam Howell. Carolina needs that. We've seen with this offense, even though it was a different offense when Larry Fedora was here, what happened when they didn't have a deep threat. The same thing would happen in this offense. If Carolina can't throw the ball deep, it's going to be really hard for them to move the ball and score points the way they want to, and they need to. 4 catches, 72 yards as a freshman, 15 catches, 201 yards that were in that great catch against Notre Dame last year. I do think he's going to have a big-time year for Carolina. Now, what that means, I don't know. I think it's more than 500 yards receiving and at least 5 touchdowns because I do think he's going to help take the top off of the defense. So he is my number 5 breakout player. If not, I don't know. He may come back for the senior year if he's on the roster.
You're going to have to put him on there again next year if he comes back.
And he might come back again for a super senior season because he's got an extra year of COVID.
He does have that.
Might put him on there again.
Yeah, I'm going to be honest. I have been pretty critical of him so far in his first couple of years on campus. But he was the hardest guy for me to leave off this list. I had him right outside of this list, but I felt like with my bold prediction that Giovanni Biggers would start multiple games next to Aquarius Conley, I felt like I had to put Gio Biggers on this list. And, I mean, look, as you mentioned, he's been one of the talks of this team since the spring. Mm-hmm. It really started generating at the end of spring and has carried over into fall camp. I mean, this is a guy that every time they talk about the secondary, whether it's the guys in the secondary, whether it's the wide receivers that are going against the secondary or the coaches, they have mentioned at length Giovanni Biggers. And the biggest thing is that Jay Bateman seems to talk glowingly about him. That's his position coach. I don't see any way that this guy doesn't have some sort of significant role in this defense this year. And I'm going to be honest, I think it's great because you know, everything that we're hearing about him, and just, you know, again, can't take a ton away from the from the game, from the spring game. But everything that we're hearing about him is positive. And I mean, look, we've heard some positive things about guys in that secondary in the past. I don't know about you. I don't feel like we heard this many positive things about a guy back there when we were talking last year about Don Chapman and Cameron Kelly before the season. And I mean, my thing is look, both of those guys are back. Don Chapman's been moved to the nickel. You could say, well, that's in part because of Jaquarius Conley. Okay, but that's also probably in part because they feel like they've got other guys back there at safety that can help them. Also, Cameron Kelly has not been talked about at all over the last couple of weeks. They have focused on Conley, Biggers, and Trey Morrison, who returns back there. So that tells me that he has seemingly beat out Cameron Kelly at that position as well. To me, that's extremely telling that you beat out a guy that was, at times, a starter a year ago, was one of the team's leading tacklers at the position a year ago as well. So I think there's a lot of really, positive things that we're hearing. Plus, I told you last week, Jay Bateman said he's rotating back and forth between both free safety and the bandit safety position. So this guy is doing everything that he can to get on the field. I don't see any way that he doesn't have a big impact for this team this year. And I definitely think that he could be that defensive playmaker that Carolina is looking for as well. So, like I said, toughest guy I had to leave off was Emery Simmons. I think another guy that's worth mentioning just because of some of the stuff that I have been hearing and seeing people, talk about coming out of fall camp. Apparently, Antoine Green has looked really, really good. So he's another guy that, he's had so many injury issues so far in his career. Carolina, as we mentioned with Emery Simmons, still looking for that guy that's going to be the deep threat. Antoine Green's shown some signs that he can be that type of guy, but every time that we try to figure out what exactly Antoine Green is, he gets hurt. So he's another guy that I think is definitely worth keeping an eye on. There's a ton of guys up there on the defensive line that I think, depending on what you look at as a breakout player, you could throw in there and say that they could potentially have a breakout season. I know there's been a lot of talk about Kevin Hester up there. He was the guy that was mentioned most recently. Mac Brown talked about him. Kedrick Bingley-Jones is a guy that I've heard mentioned in just about every talk of the defensive line, and they've usually mentioned him pretty early as well. Also, you've got the extremely talented true freshman up there, and Keyshawn Silver and Javari Ritzy. Cedric Gray is a guy that got a lot of run here over the last couple of days, right before Mac Brown talked, before the scrimmage as well. He's a guy that the linebacking core was raving about, both Jeremiah Gimmel and Eugene Asante, as well as linebacker coach Tommy Thigpen, were very complimentary of him. They said that he's been doing a lot of good stuff this offseason. He's put on some good weight, but is still one of the more athletic guys on the team as well. So he could be a guy to potentially keep an eye on. And I'm trying to think if there's anybody else that I'm maybe leaving out here. I don't think so, because I think, you've got the corner positions. You've got, Tony Grimes isn't going to break out. Storm Duck. One good thing that apparently some people have been saying is that Storm Duck is back at practice. The belief is that he is pretty much going to be a full go by Virginia Tech as long as he does not have a setback. He's not limited in practice apparently either, so that is a really, really good sign for him. Another one that I throw in there that I've heard a little bit about here, didn't hear about him as much this week, and Mac Brown didn't really bring him up, but he didn't really talk about the wide receivers that much either, was Justin Olson. And of course, I mentioned him earlier, Bryson Nesbitt, probably another guy that we should put on there to keep an eye out as well. But really quickly, just I'll run through or you run through your five, I'll run through my five. We want to hear your five as well, but who do you got 1 through 5 as your breakout guys for this year?
So number 1 for me, no surprise, Josh Downs. He's poised to be a breakout player, not just in the ACC, but around the nation of college football. Number 2, Des Evans. Number 3, our boy Giovanni Biggers, who is poised for a much bigger role this upcoming 2021
Can't go an episode without making that
season.
Joke.
Number 4, Caleb Hood at running back. He'll be the number 2 running back, but that's a big part of Carolina's offense. And so number 5 for me, my boy, Emery Simmons out there catching dimes from Slingin' Sammy this upcoming football season.
Well, number 1, I got the other guy that's going to be catching dimes from him, as you mentioned, Josh Downs at number 1. Definitely looks like a guy that is going to be the talk of the country if he can live up to the expectations that he has coming into the season. Number 2, I got Miles Murphy on the defensive line. Really see a big role coming from him, especially with the versatility that he is presenting up front for this team. Number 3, I got Des Evans. Carolina's looking for that pass rusher on the outside. They're looking for that guy that can win the one-on-one battles. Des Evans is the guy that's been talked about the most that can be able to do that for Carolina. Number 4, Eugene Asante, just going to be a tackling machine in the middle of that Carolina defense. Also going to give them some versatility, potentially dropping back in coverage. So it looks like he's poised for a pretty big season as well, but probably one of the more obvious ones and debatable as to whether or not he broke out late last year. And then I have Giovanni Biggers as number 5 on my list. Like I said, another guy that's versatile, can move back and forth between the two safety positions. It looks like he's beat out a guy that played a significant role there last year, and Cameron Kelly probably also helped to make the choice to move Don Chapman over to the nickel easier. So more than likely, he is set up for a pretty big role this season in that Tar Heel defensive backfield. And as I mentioned, we want to hear from you guys. Who are your 5 breakout candidates for this season? Send those in to us. We greatly appreciate that. May run through some of those on the next edition of the podcast as well if you send those to us. So make sure that you guys do that. We'll read off the Twitter handle, everything like that, or Facebook, whatever, wherever you want to submit those. We would greatly appreciate that. But yeah, that does it for our breakout candidates for this season. We will revisit these later on in the year, as we always do, and sometimes doesn't have the greatest results. But I'm going to be honest, I feel about as confident in my list this year as I ever have, meaning that all 5 of these guys will probably not play a single snap this year. So we go to the closing notes that I have here to close down the show. As I mentioned, we have the recruiting note for you guys. We talked about it a little bit on the podcast last week. We're going to have a podcast edition that we haven't recorded yet, but will actually come out before this podcast edition comes out. So go back and check it out, where we are previewing Travis Shaw's upcoming commitment. That will be announced on Saturday at 6 o'clock p.m. That is a huge one for Carolina. Right now, the crystal balls are all in favor of Carolina. But again, everybody's still kind of holding their breath, especially after what happened with the Dalen Everett situation, because Clemson is still there. If Carolina can wrap this one up, though, this would be monumental for Carolina in terms of trying to grow a little bit closer to Clemson, locking down the state of North Carolina even more. And, well, you get a 5-star prospect in the middle of your defense as well, and a guy that's pretty much the definition of a space eater that you want at defensive tackle in the process. So keep an eye out for that. We're going to have you covered on all fronts with that. As I mentioned, the podcast is up. We've got a commitment preview that's going to be written. We've got a commitment breakdown when he ends up committing, and we have a new writer that's potentially joining the site as well that could be giving some insight as well. So keep an eye out for all of that. That is going to be very exciting around one of the top prospects ever in the state of North Carolina in Travis Shaw. As for the guys that have already gone through the recruiting process, have already gone through their college careers, and are now in the NFL going through the NFL preseason, the Tar Heels have a bunch of guys that are on NFL rosters this year. A lot of guys that have even gotten some chances that we didn't know if they would end up getting. I mean, there were a ton of guys. Austin Proehl's on a roster. That one shocked me a little bit out in L.A. Caught a pass the other night, so he's potentially fighting for a roster spot. William Sweet, he's in Atlanta as well. He's another guy that I was a little bit surprised to see on a roster. Bug Howard got an opportunity up in Buffalo. So a bunch of Tar Heels right now getting at least some shots to try to make rosters here in the fall. Some of the standouts from week 1, of course, the guys that everybody was really wanting to see because of their roles or their projected roles this upcoming season. Michael Carter, 7 carries, 22 yards for the Jets. Javonte Williams, 5 carries, 29 yards for the Broncos. Both of those guys are not projected to be starters right now. Javonte Williams is probably the closest, but he's still behind the veteran Melvin Ingram. Melvin Gordon, excuse me, getting my AFC West Melvins mixed up there. He's a guy that, I mean, look, we know the injury history of Melvin Gordon. It's probably only a matter of time, unfortunately, for Melvin Gordon that Javonte Williams gets in there. But again, it's preseason. Those numbers aren't mind-blowing, but it's preseason. You're running behind second-team offensive linemen. It is what it is. De'Ami Brown, 2 catches, 16 yards. Chassarat, saw him in there a little bit. He was in there relatively later in the game than I thought he would be in there, especially for a third-round pick. But they have him a little bit further down on the depth chart when I went and looked than I thought he was going to be. Out there in Minnesota, to be honest, probably should play a little bit more because Minnesota looks awful. I mean, again, it's preseason, but they were getting blown out by Drew Lock and Teddy Bridgewater. So not the greatest sign for them. As for the guys that surprised, though, and had really good performances, actually had the best performances of the week, Miles Dorn is a guy that leads that group off out there in Minnesota as well. He had 5 total tackles in his game. Ryan Switzer, not the greatest game, 2 catches, 11 yards, but did have a receiving touchdown in that game for the Browns. And then Andre Smith, he actually led the Buffalo Bills in tackles. He had 8 tackles and a tackle for loss in their preseason game against the Lions. I don't remember.
I think so.
I don't remember exactly who they played. I believe it was the Lions, though. Off to a good start for him. Some of the guys, a couple of notes that I wrote down here just from looking at some of the depth charts that may shock some people. First of all, Charlie Heck is a second-team offensive tackle in Houston. He may actually get a shot there, although to be honest with you, don't really know how much of a shot he would want to get in Houston. That team is awful. I mean, here's the best part about that. I looked their depth chart up on Our Lads, which is a site that has all the depth charts on there. I went to their official website. They do not even have a depth chart tab. This is like a Max Preps team that is, like 0-7. Like they're literally not doing anything. I'm surprised they even have the roster online. Also, I went and checked. Deshaun Watson somehow not listed as a safety on there. I thought they may put him on there since they've been running him through some reps out there, which makes me wonder, is Charlie Heck maybe doing some wide receiver drills possibly? What a mess there. If he gets on the field, great for Charlie Heck. That would be fantastic. But he's there. Jason Strobridge from last year, still a third-team guy out there in Miami. But some of the guys that shocked me, Miles Dorn, who I talked about, he is right now the second-team safety for the Vikings. He is actually right behind Harrison Smith. So, barring something shocking, it looks like he is going to make that roster.
Yep.
And if there is an injury, could play a significant role for them. Another guy, this one really, I think this will surprise some people, but he was a guy that when he was in Chicago a couple of years ago, he was doing some good things, did some good things for the Saints last year. Now he could potentially make the roster. That's Jalen Dalton. And I was telling you before the show, he's down there. He's listed as a number 2 at defensive tackle, and they are not going to have Charles Onyemata to start the season due to a suspension. He may play a significant role early on for the Saints. Now, part of that says the Saints lost a lot of talent on their defensive line. The other part of that says this is a guy that's put in a lot of work. Mm-hmm. He was one of those guys that we looked at when he was coming out in his year of the draft, and we were like, look, if he makes a preseason roster, that would be a great step for him. He's really worked hard and has put himself in a good position to potentially make a roster there. So congratulations to all those former Tar Heel players that are on rosters right now or pushing for roles this season. And that's one of those angles where if you're not really all that interested in preseason football, it's pretty much everybody, then you can go through and check out some of those former Tar Heel guys. Mitch Trubisky, of course, up in Buffalo as well, another guy that you could check out. So that's something interesting to keep an eye on over these next couple of weeks. So that wraps it up for this edition of the podcast. Head over to the website, guys. There's so much great stuff going on up there right now. We've got you covered. Earlier in the week, we had a commitment from Jake Pope. That's actually tonight, the night that we are recording, but it'll be earlier in the week when we put this edition of the episode up. So make sure that you go back and check out. We'll have some reaction to that, but mainly we're going to focus on that upcoming commitment of Travis Shaw. You'll want to be locked in for all of the information on that over on the website. And again, we're getting closer to the start of the season in Blacksburg, September 3rd. Day of recording, we're now in 3 weeks. By the time this goes up, we will be creeping in on 2 weeks away. So we're going to have a bunch of great content going up there. As we mentioned, bold predictions, breakout candidates, those are podcasts, but we also do the article versions of those where we go even a little more in depth on some of these guys. So make sure you keep an eye out for that. Check those out on the website. We're also going to have everything that you need when it comes to preparing for the game against Virginia Tech. We'll have your in-depth preview for you. We'll, of course, have your recap, your trench report, your stock report. All that stuff is coming back this year, so make sure that you guys are keeping an eye out on that. And it's an exciting year for Tar Heel football. We're going to have you covered wall to wall from the start of the season to the end of the season, no matter the results for this Tar Heel football team. Also, in terms of some of the stuff that we're doing recruiting wise, it's a little bit separate sometimes, I guess you would quantify it as, but the scouting reports, we are going to try to do some of those this year. Probably won't be as many as we've done in the past, really just due to the fact that there's not as much time in terms of the schedules for us this year as there have been in the past. So while there may not be as many of them this year, there are still going to be some up there on the website for you guys to check out throughout the season. So that's what's going on football side of things with all that stuff. Trying to think if there's anything else football-wise. I mean, you could go back, check out all those in-depth position previews as well to get a feel for this roster as they head towards that game against Virginia Tech. And, of course, we've got you covered whenever Mac Brown has a press conference here in fall camp to try to give you an idea of what exactly is going on. We got an article up there from his last press conference on Sunday. You can go back and read a little bit more about what he said about Caleb Hood emerging as the number 2 guy behind Ty Chandler. You can read a little bit more about the quarterbacks, how they haven't separated yet, what he's trying to do to get them to separate, and a little bit more on Bo Corrales being limited and what that means for the Tar Heels this upcoming season. All that over on the website for you, as well as some great basketball coverage throughout the offseason here. Things are really going to start ramping up, though, pretty quickly here as Carolina will get into practice here shortly after the football season starts. And, of course, it is early November when they end up starting the season, but I mean, look, it's going to come a lot faster than you probably would imagine. The guys are already out there going through some practices and stuff like that in the summer. So this team coming together for what will be the first campaign under new head coach Hubert Davis. Josh has you covered with that on the website right now. And I'll join him a little bit during the season if needed, everything like that, to help him through what will be an exciting year for Carolina basketball as well. Podcast side of things, if you're listening to the podcast, make sure you subscribe to the podcast wherever you're listening. It's on any of the major platforms that you can get your podcast. Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, probably the main ones that most people use. But any of those other ones, you can check it out on there as well. We've got it on as many as we possibly can. And we also have it over we also have it over on Facebook. We post the link on there for you guys, as well as the video link for the podcast that is on there. That's where you can check it out. That's the best place to like and follow so that you receive everything in one area. Those audio podcasts, the video editions of the podcast, the articles, all that stuff is in one central place on the Facebook page, Heel Tough Blog on Facebook. And then you can head over to Twitter, follow the Twitter page at Heel Tough Blog. And then follow us on our personal pages at HTB Anthony for me, at HTB Josh for him, and then at Hack Zubbard 2 for our recruiting analyst here on the podcast. That wraps it up for this edition of the podcast. Want to thank Josh for hosting with me. Want to thank you guys for watching and listening. And as always, go Tar Heels.